The next thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about another thing that you can do with all of this, which is reading and writing from the internet. Ooh, say it with me. Ooh. All right, what do I mean by reading from the internet? Well, it turns out there's lots of stuff on the internet that's really, really handy and useful. So there's probably sites that you go to on a daily basis. You might go to Reddit or Rate My Professor and talk about how wonderful I am and all of those great things. But you might want to write that in code where you would want to be able to pull information in. So, for example, you could conceivably write a program which interacts with D2L for you or interacts with L Express for you. Now, this would be a little bit more advanced than what we're going to cover today because you'd have to know a lot about the internals of how D2L works and how to authenticate to it and all of that good stuff. But it is plausible. So the example we're going to do today is there are a bunch of services on the internet that will give you just cool information, is what I'm going to say. And I'm going to show you an example of one of those. So how does this work? Well, in this example, we're just going to pull in the Google homepage, which isn't really very useful, but well, here we are. So a couple of things that you need if you're going to do this. So we've already talked about Java IO, but if you're going to be dealing with the internet, then you also need java.net because you're actually doing connections. And in this case, when you're opening a file, the file that you're opening is what's called a socket. Sockets just mean that you are dealing with the network on the computer. And sockets inherently know how to connect to remote servers. They can also be local servers. It is possible that you could talk to yourself, which sounds very screwy, but it actually happens more often than you would think. But in this example, we're talking to a server out on the internet. The server that we're going to talk to is www.google.com. The port on which we are going to connect is port 80, which is the standard port for HTTP, which is what you use every time when you open up Chrome, Safari, Firefox, or Edge, or whatever other browser you might be using. So when you type into your browser www.google.com or just google.com, it works either way. What you're actually doing is you're making a connection to something called port 80 on a server called google.com. If you type in HTTPS, google.com, you're actually connecting on port 443. So anything that's encrypted, the port number changes from 80 to 443. If you're interested in all of this, take a networking class. They'll teach you all about it. But for the purposes of today's lecture, what we're mentioning here is that this is the name of a server that you want to talk to, and this is the port. If you're dealing with HTTP traffic, this will always be port 80. If you're dealing with 443, things are screwy because you have to speak encryption, and that's not going to be as easy as you think it is. So for all these examples, you're going to be wanting to deal with port 80. All right, so instead of opening a file, what this does is it opens a socket, which works just like a file. Instead of it being a local file in the file system, it's a socket to this remote server. Once I have that, I'm going to create something called an output stream, and I may also want an input stream. All right, so yes, there we go. I was like, wait, where's the other one? PrintWriter PW gets new PrintWriter. This is going on OS, which is the output stream. Okay, so an output stream from the perspective of this computer is me sending data to google.com. An input stream from the sense of this computer is google.com sending information back to me. It's input to me and output to me. So when you're thinking of inputs and outputs, you need to think of from the perspective of the computer that you're writing the code on. All right, so we opened an output stream because I wish to speak to google.com. It's important that I be able to do that for what we're doing. And I create my PrintWriter, which allows me to write to that socket. Now I'm going to do a print on that socket. So I'm saying pw.println, and what I'm typing is this very, very strange thing where I wrote get space / index.html followed by 2 carriage returns. Those carriage returns are critical, as it turns out. Okay, pausing from the lecture for just a moment, let me explain what's going on here. This is the HTTP protocol. This is how you request a page from a remote server. The details of all that are not particularly interesting, but you will always do get, which is the word that you use when you're trying to access something on a server, and then you will pass it the thing you're trying to access, which is the name of the page. If you had put in an image file here, so if you had asked for, google.jpg or something, then it would return the JPEG from the server instead of returning the index.html. If you've ever written some HTML, probably in CSE 1300 or in another class if you're doing anything like that, then this is how your web browser actually does it. So this code that we just looked at is the very basics of how Chrome, Firefox, Edge, Safari, they all do this exact thing in the background. They open a socket to the server that you type in the URL bar on port 80, and then they print something along this line of get space slash the file name space carriage return carriage return. And when they do that and make sure that they flush, which we have highlighted in yellow here to remind you, because if you don't do that flush, it doesn't actually send it to the server. What it will do is it will return to you the actual page from the server. So I'm going to demonstrate this not in code. I'm going to open up a, how am I going to do that? There we go. I'm going to open up, don't worry about the details of what I'm doing right now. I'm just making a connection to a server so that I have the ability to actually type in the command. So I'm going to type in a weird command. Don't worry about the word telnet, it doesn't matter. And I'm going to go to google.com on port 80. And this is me actually talking to the server. I'm going to type in get space slash index.html, and then I'm going to hit enter twice. And you can see that returned to me a whole bunch of stuff. And you might be saying to yourself, I'm sorry, what did it return? So this was the command that I typed. And you can see what it actually responded with was HTTP 1.0 200 OK. And then it told me the date according to the server. And then it gave me a bunch of information about the information that I'm getting. It set a cookie to tell me who they are. And at that point, I then got the actual text of the page. If I were a web browser and I were able to parse all of this and display it to you, what that would look like is the Google homepage. Now, you might be looking at that saying, that's an awful lot of stuff for just a Google homepage. And the answer is because they run a bunch of JavaScript in the background, and that's what you're actually looking at is all the JavaScript that tracks everything about what you're doing. But you can do this on any web server. So for example, I can do Microsoft.com on port 80. And I'm going to do the same thing there. I got an internal server error because it's set up differently. Some servers are set up where they require you to send additional information beyond this. Let's try. Yeah, okay. Let's pick another site. Think of a site name. Where are we? We're on, Kennesaw. 480. All right, and that one said it has been permanently moved, and it tried to redirect me to HTTPS and then its own server. So when you go to, in a browser, kennesaw.edu, you actually immediately get redirected to a secure version. So where it actually connected me to was HTTPS, and I know that because of that little padlock. Okay, well, all this is fascinating, I'm sure. But back in our code, if I can find the window, there it is. Back in our code, what I was doing here was I was making a connection to google.com, and I was sending this weird string get space slash index HTML, and then hitting enter twice. When I do that, it is then going to return to me a big blob of text. And very specifically, that big blob of text, I now have to read in. So I set up a scanner using the scanner object, so new scanner, and what I'm passing it is my sock, which is the socket that I created up here, get input stream, and that's much like when I made the output stream. Remember, input is coming back from the server, and then I said, while that scanner has a next line, I want you to read the next line, put it in a string called data line, and then I'm going to print out that data line, which would actually show me the values from the server. All right, the equivalent code is here in C#, and the only thing that's really different here is instead of using a socket, as it's called, we actually call it TCP client, and that's because in C# they differentiate between a TCP server and a UDP server, whereas in Java they are considered both sockets. So there's a TCP client, we pass in the host name, port 80, and then we use client.getStream, on a variable called ns, and then we create a new stream reader and a new stream writer on that, which I'm calling SR and SW, so that's the read and that's the write. And so on the write, I'm able to do a write line, pass in that same crazy get slash index HTML, make sure you call flush. If you don't call flush, it won't work. And then while not end of stream on the reader, read in a line and print it out to the screen, and make sure you close the socket at the end. So same exact code. All right, so let me show you another example of that, which is maybe more interesting. So I went out and I looked up a list of different freely available APIs that are on there. So you can again see the URL that's up here. Almost all of these will work to some extent, but there are some caveats. So these are just services that are available on the internet that you can call, and you'll find all kinds of neat information from them. So for example, this 7 timer one up at the top, I actually fooled with it for a while and I could not get it to work. Their server seems to require you to pass something that's not clear to me. So don't go down that path too far, but this theoretically gives you the weather forecast. And I was able to do it manually, like if you press this, you get the data, but they obviously require that you pass something, and I don't know what it is, so this won't actually work in the code. But halfway down this list, the one that caught my eye was MusicBrainz. And one of the reasons that MusicBrainz caught my eye is because it doesn't require HTTPS, which again, I can't do that in Java. All of these that say HTTPS, you can't do it because you have to speak encrypted to the server, and you can't do that just directly by typing. You actually have to go through layers of encryption. You can connect to HTTPS servers in Java, but it's a whole different set of objects, and you can also do it in C#. You don't do it directly like we're doing it here in this example. But MusicBrainz does allow you to do it directly. So what is MusicBrainz? Well, if you go to their website, they have a database that has information about pretty much every song, artist, album, and genre that's out there, and it will give you all kinds of information about that artist, that album, that song, and so on and so forth. So the cool thing is that this is available, and this is what's called an API. So APIs are just ways on the internet that you can interact with a service. So think of it this way. Somebody at MusicBrainz wrote a bunch of Java code, and they allow you to ask specific questions off of them, and they give you back answers. And when I say they, I mean a server that's sitting out on the internet. So when I talk to MusicBrainz, I can ask it a question, and it will give me back an answer. And the way that I do that is through what's called an API. A RESTful API means that I can do this over HTTP connections, and that's exactly what they have set up for us here. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to make calls to MusicBrainz from a piece of Java, and I'm going to pull back some neat information. So just going to show you the code first before we get started. So it's in this same exact replit, and it's here for both Java and C#. So let me just scroll up and show it to you in both. All right, and so there's another method in here. You'll see up at the top, this is the method for averaging the grades, but there's another method called artist info, which takes in an artist name, and this is obviously a music artist name. And so it sets up a host name, which is musicbrainz.org, and it sets up a query string, which is very specifically how you ask about an artist. So this is set up to deal with artists. If you wanted to code other stuff, you'd have to go read their page here on MusicBrainz and figure out how to do other types of queries. In this case, I was just doing one query for an artist name. But there's certainly piles of information on here. I'm doing this if you're trying to follow along at home. All right, so I'm getting in, they told me this is how I request a particular artist, and I put their name at the end of that query. So that's why I'm including artist name, and then HTTP 1.0 is usually going to be at the end of any query that you make. All right, so here we are in Java. I am creating a new socket to the host name on port 80. The host name will be musicbrainz.org. And then I am doing a get output stream, and I am doing a print writer on that output stream so that I have the ability to write to them. And so what I end up writing is the query string, which is that weird get blah, 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 blah with the artist name in it. And then this particular service requires me to send two other things. One of them is a host name, which is their own host name. You have to say that to them as to who it is that you're trying to ask. And the other one is you have to identify yourself as to what type of web browser you are. This is just something that they require. It's not uncommon that people require this. It's called the user agent. So I'm pretending like I am a Firefox version 47 web browser. Why? Because that was the one that I could find a user agent string for quite handily on the internet. So this is just a string that I'm passing to them to say, I am Firefox version 47, and they're okay with that. You might be wondering, but you're lying because you're not Firefox 47, you're actually just Java code. And you're correct. I am totally lying and telling them that I'm Firefox 47, and they have no way of validating that. As long as I give them a valid user string, which this is one, and that's why I had to look it up, they will accept it. Yay for me. I can lie. All right, so I did a print line with the query string, which was that weird get thing, and that I knew to do because that's something that they told me to do. I have this print lines where I'm printing out the host name. That's just something that I have to pass to them, the user agent, and then I'm printing an extra blank line. Print line by itself prints one carriage return, but as you remember, I always have to send two carriage returns, so a print line by itself just sends another carriage return for me. And then I flush. Whoosh. At that moment, all of that junk got sent to their server, and their server generates a response. So I use scanner to read back in from my input stream, and I get something called return page. All right, and my return page is just a variable of type scanner, and I can say return page while it has a next line, I want to read it in and print it out. Okay, and of course I have to catch an IO in case something goes wrong, an IO exception, and that code is the Java code. I'm going to show you the same code in C# as soon as I find the appropriate window. Pretty much all of this part is the same. The only thing that's different is I'm using TCP client, and I'll just let you read through that on the screen. But I mean, effectively, I'm doing the exact same lines as I was doing in the other one. It's just that I'm using the C# code. And I'm just going to scroll down so you can see the exception handling. Again, it's printing that out. So I'm going to comment out the call to average grades, which was what I was doing earlier, and I'm going to uncomment something where I'm calling artist info, which is my method name up here, and I'm passing in the name of an artist, and I'm randomly picked Zed, who is an EDM artist if you've never heard of him. So I'm going to call that, and I'm going to get back a pile of text from that service on the internet, which has all kinds of information about Zed. Very specifically, the information I get back is in XML format, which I mentioned is one of the common formats that you'll deal with. And so you can see at the top here it says XML version 1.0. It's encoded using UTF-8, and then it gives me all kinds of information. So like if we scroll down in here, it says the artist ID, and this is a big long string. That's a unique identifier. It is for Zed. If I then were to make another call, which I can, where I pass his particular name, it'll give me back all of his albums and all of his songs and all of that type of stuff. But even just doing this query, it does tell me that this is a person as opposed to a group or a band. And then it tells me that their name is Zed. You can see that their gender is male. You can see their country is DE, which the country DE is Germany. And then you have a bunch of other stuff in here. So the name is Germany for the country. You can see lifespan information has not ended, so he is still alive and producing of some level. What city is he from? Apparently Saratov, and so on and so forth. He is a German-Russian recording producer, multi-instrumental songwriter, and he's also known as that name, which I'm not going to try and butcher, and so on and so forth. The point of this is a service on the internet which throws back a pile of information. And now I could parse all of that. I could use an XML parser object to pull all this in, and that would give me arrays of information that I could then pull data out of. The details of how you parse this is beyond the scope of this lecture, but you absolutely can do it. Just go look up JSON parser or XML parser in your respective language, and you'll find that there's something that'll take a blob of XML like this and convert it into a data structure for you. And then you can start walking your way through the data structure. And the data structure is probably arrays of strings and so on and so forth, which may have multiple layers in it. You may have arrays of strings, multi-dimensional stuff and all that. So that is the idea of making an API call. I should probably prove that it does work in the other language as well. So I'm going to comment out average grades in Java and run it over here, and you're going to get the same blob back. So the point of this exercise was to show you that there are things on the internet that you can connect to and get information back. Like there is no way that you could have found that information locally on your server. This is something that you would have to go out and ask. And of course, this information gets updated constantly. And there's nothing magical about the word Z. We can certainly type in Drake and rerun the command, and I will get back information about Drake instead of getting information about Z, as I merge two names together. If Drake and Zed had a baby, they'd be Dreads. Okay, let's hope that the computing thing works out for me, because the life in comedy isn't looking too good. All right, so and now obviously you're getting information about Drake. So that is the idea of making a socket call, which is very similar to making a file call. You've now seen how you read and write from each of these things. There was another list of APIs that if you wanted to go play with, there are other ones on here. One of the ones that I didn't play with but looked pretty interesting and I thought might have been fun was iTunes. You can actually query songs and stuff from iTunes. However, that does say HTTPS. I don't know if it's also offered on HTTP, but whether there's stuff that'll tell you when you're going to die, there's stuff that'll tell you where your name is from, there's stuff that'll tell you jokes, there's stuff that'll give you memes, there's all kinds of cool APIs on the internet. Basically every service that you have probably ever used, there's probably a API call somewhere that somebody provides. Usually you have to sign up for a key and you have to pass all kinds of other information to them. These were meant to be easy ones that you don't have to pass anything crazy to it, like XKCD comics and stuff like that. So hopefully that gave you an idea of some of the stuff that you can do with FileIO. You can read files, you can write files, you can talk to servers on the internet using the HTTP protocol. You can talk to servers on the internet using other protocols. They don't have to be HTTP. And again, all of that is beyond the scope of this class, but I wanted to get your appetite wet for all of that. So hopefully that gives you some great ideas.